It begins as a sound you feel before you hear. A low pressure in the ground under your feet. Then the dishes in your cupboard begin to rattle. You live 900 miles from Wyoming. You have never thought about Wyoming in your life. You walk outside. To the northwest, above the horizon, a column of grey is climbing into the stratosphere. The Yellowstone caldera has erupted. Not a geyser, not a small vent. A caldera-forming supereruption, the rarest and largest volcanic event the planet produces. This is Scenario Zero. Today, could you survive the Yellowstone supervolcano? Beneath Yellowstone National Park sits one of the largest active volcanic systems on Earth. It is not a mountain. It is the opposite of a mountain, a caldera, a vast collapsed basin roughly 40 miles across, formed when the ground fell into the emptied space left by past eruptions. Volcanologists measure eruptions on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale that, like the scale for earthquakes, is logarithmic. Each step is roughly 10 times the erupted volume of the step below it. An ordinary destructive eruption might rate a 4 or a 5. A supereruption is defined as a magnitude 8, more than 1,000 cubic kilometres of erupted material. Yellowstone has produced at least 3 of these in the geologic past. The largest, roughly 2.1 million years ago, ejected so much material that its ashfall has been identified in dozens of states. These are not storms. They are not regional disasters. They are events that rewrite the surface of a continent. One number matters more than any other. A supereruption is not measured in hours. The eruptive phase can last days to weeks, and the consequences are measured in years. Yellowstone sits above a hotspot, a plume of abnormally hot rock rising from deep within the mantle. As the North American plate drifts slowly southwest, the hotspot stays fixed, burning a track of old calderas across the landscape behind it. Today, that hotspot sits beneath Wyoming. Above the plume sits a magma reservoir. For most of its life, this reservoir is mostly solid rock, hot but crystallized, not liquid enough to erupt. A supereruption requires a large fraction of that reservoir to become mobile melt at the same time. This is why supereruptions are so rare. The system has to be loaded just so. When enough melt accumulates, the magma becomes buoyant and rich in dissolved gas. As it nears the surface, pressure drops, and the dissolved gas comes out of solution as expanding bubbles. The magma does not flow. It shatters. It is blown apart into ash and pumice and driven upward in a column reaching the stratosphere. But the towering column is not the main hazard. When the eruption rate is high enough, the column becomes too dense to stay aloft. It collapses under its own weight. What pours off the sides is a pyroclastic flow, a ground-hugging avalanche of incandescent gas and ash moving at highway speed, hot enough to sterilize everything in its path. Hour 0. The eruption begins. Within roughly 100 miles of the caldera, pyroclastic flows make survival effectively impossible. That zone includes the park itself and the surrounding country. For people in that radius, there is no preparation. There is only not being there. Hour 6. The ash plume is now in the upper atmosphere and moving with the prevailing winds for most of the year, from west to east. Cities across the northern plains watch the sky turn brown, then grey, then dark. Streetlights switch on at midday. Hour 12. Ash begins to accumulate. Volcanic ash is not soft. It is pulverized rock and glass, abrasive, heavy, and, when wet, it sets like wet cement. A few inches of it is enough to collapse a poorly built or flat roof. Hour 24. Ash shuts down modern infrastructure with brutal efficiency. It is conductive when damp. It shorts power lines and substations. It clogs water filtration. It is drawn into car engines and aircraft turbines, where it melts and destroys them. Across the Ashfall zone, the grid fails. Water treatment fails. And air travel stops completely. Hour 48. The air itself is now the hazard. Fine volcanic ash, inhaled, scars the lungs and triggers respiratory failure in the vulnerable. Outside the deep flow zone, this becomes the primary cause of death. Not heat, not impact, but the simple act of breathing contaminated air. Hour 72. Within the heavy ashfall zone, roads are impassable, vehicles are dead, and supply chains have stopped entirely. The just-in-time delivery system cannot operate through a landscape that has buried the roads themselves. For millions of people, the first 72 hours are spent sealed indoors, waiting for the fall to stop. When the eruption finally ends, the landscape does not recover the way a flooded landscape recovers. The ash does not drain away. It stays. And the area it has buried is not a city or a region. It is a meaningful fraction of a continent. Week 1. Agriculture in the heavy fall zone is finished for the season. Crops are buried and crushed. Livestock that grazed on ash-coated pasture ingest abrasive glass and fluorine compounds and die. Some of the most productive farmland on the planet is taken out of production in a single week. Week 2. Cleanup is a problem without precedent. Ash cannot simply be washed away. It clogs and overwhelms every drainage system. It has to be physically removed, truckload by truckload, and there is nowhere convenient to put it. Even a thin coating over a city represents millions of tons of dense abrasive material. Week 3. Outside the heavy fall zone, the rest of the continent is not buried, but it is not normal. Even a light dusting grounds aircraft, strains water systems, and damages machinery. And every region is now connected to the same crippled supply network running through the zone that is gone. Week 4. The acute disaster in the Ashfall zone is still unfolding. But a second disaster, slower, larger, global, has already begun in the upper atmosphere. And it has nothing to do with ash on the ground. The largest hazard of a supereruption is not the ash that falls. It is the gas that stays aloft. The eruption injects enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. There, it converts into a fine haze of sulfate particles. That haze does something simple and devastating. It reflects sunlight back into space before it can reach the ground. A large enough veil cools the entire planet. This is called a volcanic winter. Smaller eruptions have done it for a year. A Yellowstone scale event could sustain it for several. A few degrees of global cooling does not sound dramatic, but agriculture runs on narrow margins. A shortened growing season, a hard frost arriving early, a cool, wet summer across multiple continents at the same time. This is what causes the failure of harvests worldwide. The world holds, at any given time, only a few months of grain in storage. The global food system is built on the assumption that next year's harvest will arrive on schedule. A multi-year volcanic winter breaks that assumption everywhere at once. This is the honest scale of the scenario. A Yellowstone supereruption would devastate the American interior directly. But its deepest danger is global and indirect. A cold, hungry few years for the entire planet, regardless of how far you live from Wyoming. So, the question this episode has promised to answer: could you survive the Yellowstone supervolcano? The honest answer splits in two: the days and the years. And your survival depends on preparing for both. The days. If you are within the deep hazard zone near the caldera, no kit saves you. The only protection is distance. But for the far larger population under the ashfall, the threat is breathable air and a loaded roof. You need a properly rated respirator for every person, not a cloth mask. You need plastic sheeting and tape to seal windows and vents. And you need to clear ash from your roof before its weight becomes a danger. The supplies for the acute phase are the channel's familiar list, but stretched longer. Water, 1 gallon per person per day for far more than a week, because treatment plants will be down and clogged. shelf-stable food, a hand crank radio, flashlights and stored batteries, a full first aid kit, a long supply of essential medication, cash in small bills, and ash-rated filters for any vehicle or generator you intend to keep running the years. This is what makes a supereruption different from every other scenario on this channel. The acute danger passes in weeks. The volcanic winter does not. No personal pantry holds several years of food. Survival across that span is not an individual project. It depends on the resilience of whole communities and food systems, which means the most important preparation is the one this channel returns to every episode: community. In a multi-year crisis, the households that endure are not the isolated ones with the deepest single pantry. They are the ones embedded in a town, a neighbourhood, a network that grows food, shares labour, and keeps its members alive together. A garden, a skill, and a trusted circle outlast any stockpile. How likely is a Yellowstone supereruption in your lifetime? Here, the honest answer is genuinely reassuring. Yellowstone's 3 great eruptions are spread across roughly 2 million years. The average interval between them is on the order of hundreds of thousands of years. The annual probability of a caldera-forming eruption is estimated at roughly 1 in 700,000. To put that plainly, in any given year, it almost certainly will not happen. And the United States Geological Survey is unambiguous. There is no sign that the system is building toward one now. So, the honest framing is the opposite of most episodes. This is the rarest scenario we will ever cover. One you will almost certainly never see. We include it not because it is imminent, but because it defines the ceiling, the largest natural catastrophe the planet can produce, and because the preparations it demands are the same ones that carry you through every smaller disaster in between. We do not run this channel to scare you. We run it because the most useful question a person can sit with periodically, calmly, without panic: what would I actually do? Not in theory, on day 1, in year 1. If you found this scenario useful, subscribe to Scenario 0. We are going to spend a lot of time in the dark hypothetical, so that in the bright real, you are slightly more ready than you were this morning.